back, everyone. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining us. Absolutely. So let's set some, the stage here for this conversation. Kinexys has been around for, since 2015, even more, right? And it wasn't even Kinexys back then, nor Onyx. It was the Blockchain Excellence Center. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how long, or what's been learned over the course of time, and where are we today with Kinexys?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's crazy to think we've been around for 10 years now, and 4+ of that, we've actually had live networks going. So we've been in the space now, as you mentioned, since 2015. At the time, we were a very small group, about less than 10 people globally, focused on what is blockchain technology, how do we think about it as a firm, and specifically, because we work at J.P.Morgan, how does it apply to financial services? So we spent a lot of time over those initial years figuring out, okay, what is the technology, where is it best placed within our walls, and how do we also think about it evolving over time? So with that, we did a bunch of different experiments. We did a bunch of work, not just from the technology standpoint, but more fundamental finance standpoint as well. So in 2016, we open sourced Quorum, fork of Ethereum, but with some enhancements for financial services. In 2017, we unveiled our Link network, which is as an information sharing network for payments-based inquiries. In 2018, we played around with tokenization. We looked first around capital markets. We looked at the lack of transparency, high operational costs, manual processes, and really looked at how tokenization, and tokenization specifically of assets, would be able to unlock something new. So we did a bunch of work then, and what actually came out of it at the time was we don't have cash on chain. So we have this tokenized asset, and now it's sitting there. Interesting, but not enough to move the needle. And so with that, didn't look at that as a failed experiment, but actually a really key learning about the importance of cash on chain. And so the next year, launched what is now known as Kinexys Digital Payments. This was previously known as J.P.Morgan Coin. And with this, we introduced the first on-chain cash component that was from a bank, and it's still in existence today. And on our Kinexys Digital Assets platform, we are one of the only, if potentially the only platform out there that has on-chain cash that is regulated and is natively on-chain. And so that was a really exciting time for us, and came together as a business and decided, okay, there's enough real promise here to go all in. And so in 2020, we launched what is now known as Kinexys, formerly Onyx, to really solidify our business and our business specific to blockchain. With this, we created 4 different stripes. We have our Link network, which I just went through. We have our Kinexys Digital Payments, exactly like it sounds, payments on blockchain. And then our Kinexys Digital Assets platform, which is for asset tokenization and money movement through DVP and instantaneous settlement, which is a really key feature of our platform that continues to be a differentiator 4 years on today. We process over 2 billion in transactions a day, and we've processed more than 1.7 trillion to date on that platform. My team that I run is Kinexys Labs, and this is, you can think of it sort of as the continuation from those early experiment days to say, okay, now that we have these established networks, great, but there's still more to do. The tech is always changing, it's always evolving, and that's something I love about this space. And so my team focuses on that. So if we look at the early days, where I like to think about it as the fundamental, so information, money, assets. Get all of them on chain, lots of cool stuff to be done. But then, how do we actually scale these businesses? How do we scale the ecosystem? How do we continue to grow and mature as an industry? And that's where we think about enhancements and functionalities, which I know we'll get into, around interoperability, identity, privacy, and how do we think about where those pieces of tech are going, the constructs needed to get us there, but even more importantly, what do our clients want and what do they need? Because at the core of it, that's what drives everything we do.
100%. It's all about demand, right? And that helps justify it to leadership too. It's like, this is why we're approaching it. Our clients want it. Exactly. Or they'll go to someone that can offer it, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned identity,
Yep.
and that's something that Kinexys Labs, Kinexys in general, has been very forward thinking about. What are maybe some of the milestones of Project Epic, your SDK becoming a bit more open source? How do you see those signal how we're approaching identity, and what do you think the real unlock is for RWAs?
Definitely. So digital identity is something we've been looking at since before we were even Kinexys, and really look at decentralized identity as an enabler for future on-chain activity. And so with that, we had done a bunch of work in our early days, looking at verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, and all the different pieces that make up a decentralized identity framework. With that, a bunch of testing, a bunch of use cases, and then a great milestone for us was in 2023, we sponsored a hackathon and we open sourced our SSI SDK. This was the only time in J.P.Morgan history that we had open sourced our code, the first being that Quorum network that we open sourced in 2016. So that was a really great moment for us, and also echoes back to our commitment to growing with the community. There's nothing more important than the users and developers. That's who's actually at the core of it. So being able to get feedback from the community was really important to us, and also it's the best way to foster innovation. So that was a really cool project that we did. We got over like 90 use cases out of it, and it's really cool to see them grow. And more recently, last year, as you mentioned, we did Project Epic, which is enterprise, privacy, identity, and composability. So with that, the thinking from an identity standpoint is that in order to truly scale, in order to actually capture the addressable market, you need privacy and identity, and specifically privacy-preserving identity on-chain and reusable identity on-chain. And so that was the crux of how we shaped that project. And we did a few things differently on the privacy side, which I can get into, but on the identity side, we implemented our solution in our different work to further kind of make ourselves aware and conscious in our decisions around what tech we were building and why, because it always changes, right? So just because something worked really well 2 years ago doesn't mean it's going to work well tomorrow. And so I think that's something that's really great about our business, is we're like brutally honest with ourselves in that sense, to be like, okay, now let's stand it up against what else is out there, right? Like, let's look at soulbounds, let's look at all these other ways, let's look at allow listing, and really challenge ourselves to say, like, is it still good? And that is always, I think, a great exercise to go through, especially in a space like this where, it changes every now and then.
Absolutely.
And then more.
And I do want to touch on that a little later, but just to stick on the topic here of identity, and you mentioned privacy too, then how does privacy come into play? Because on the one hand, you need to access some of the information. On the other, there are privacy concerns. So how do you view that playing a role in tokenization?
Yeah, I mean, we're a bank, right? We care about privacy.
Exactly.
It's high on our list of things, and so do our clients.
Yeah.
When we think about the future of blockchain, the future of tokenization, privacy is a key enabler to having asset tokenization be an important enabler for all. So there are subsets of investors today that don't care about privacy, and that's great. There are investors that heavily care about privacy, and that's great. I think it's all about how do you actually create solutions that allow the ecosystem to actually realize the total potential and the total market that's out there. And so when we thought about privacy, thought about it in a few different ways, looking at not just privacy of a transaction, but privacy of the asset itself, privacy of the identity of the investor, and privacy of the transaction amount too. So these were different pieces that we played around with when we were looking at privacy. And then when you think about identity, creating privacy-preserving identity on-chain and having that be reusable is a crucial kind of catalyst that we see for future adoption, especially making that reusable down the road. Like, identity checks are very cumbersome. Onboarding, KYC, AML, all these things, right? Like, we're all doing similar things for multiple different types of assets and use cases, and to actually enable credentials to be on-chain for verification and not reveal too much information is really key.
Makes sense. And reusability, that word right there, I think also blends in well with interoperability, and which has always been a friction point in this space. I think it still is. But how is Kinexys approaching this to make it as seamless as possible, as frictionless as possible, when you have multiple protocols and environments, not to mention your clients have probably more complex structures and whatnot. So how are you approaching interoperability? One, you just mentioned, kind of how you're doing it from a privacy standpoint, but also on the rest of the spectrum of the systems here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sounds a little bit like a broken record, but like we like to get hands-on with the technology. There's no other way to learn it. And we also like to look at the wide spectrum of technologies that are out there before making any decisions. So for example, with the privacy work, we looked at both ZKP and FHE and different implementations of both. Same on, on the identity side, different implementations. When we think about interoperability, it's no different, right? The biggest core kind of value we focus on is how do we grow and scale in a secure manner to make sure that we are able to support our clients wherever they want to be. And I think that's kind of across the board when we think about interoperability, when we think about different networks, we think about, non-EVM versus EVM and everything in between. It's all about how do we best connect in a seamless way to allow our clients to do what they want to do. So in 2023, we did a proof of concept looking at different interoperability solutions, looking at point-to-point, hub and spoke, cross-chain messaging, looking at bridging, and really playing around with the tech in order to see what could work for us. And the other component there too, I mean, now it's 2 years later, the tech's evolved again. So then how do we think about folding in our learnings from 2 years ago to make sure that we are taking them with us as we look at other kind of focus areas and trends, and I know we'll get into it in a little bit, but even if you think about the public chain, right? And what the world looks like today from a regulatory environment to a year ago, I view that no differently than I view interoperability, right? It's where do our clients want to be? How can we best serve them? And where is the best place to do that? So when we think about, private versus permissioned, I don't see it as, a black and white binary choice. There are some use cases and assets that are best kept permissioned. There are some that are better suited to public. And I don't think that you have to choose. It's where is the utility going to be greatest? Where is the right location for the use case? And where are the clients, right? Like launching on a chain to launch on a chain in a production setting, to me, is not necessarily what I look to do. From a experimentation standpoint, yes. But when we talk about production, there has to be real viable reasons behind why you're doing that.
Exactly, and you just mentioned too that you have some parts that are on private permission, then you have public for the other parts. How do you see that evolving? Because I think there is like a fine line between the two that's getting blurred more as people kind of continue this debate, build other chains and whatnot. So how do you see that evolving so that eventually it is all interoperable with each other?
Yeah, I mean, this year is a huge moment in time for the industry. And even with Project Epic last year, one of the reasons that we focus on that topic is it's the first year in 2024 that we saw large traditional institutions going on public. And you can't ignore that. It's a huge moment in time, and it's a really interesting step forward for the industry and what we should be looking at collectively. So from that standpoint, it doesn't necessarily change the kind of fundamental way that we look at use cases and where to grow with the technology, because it all comes down to the same focus, which I think is really important to look at, what's noise and what's real. But I think what's always real at the end of the day is what do clients want and where is utility? Yep. And I think if you're true to that, then that's how you're able to kind of keep your scope in check and not kind of get carried away or distracted.
Makes sense. And kind of piggybacking off of that, the definition of success has kind of evolved in this space over time, and you've seen it firsthand, starting that early on, as mentioned, again, 2015. So the goalpost has changed, and I think we started seeing a lot more things change from proof of concept to now in production, this is it, and so forth. So from your point of view, how do you what are maybe some of the metrics, or how do you approach from a philosophy standpoint? Is this something that we just want to experiment with because it's cool and see what happens, versus no, this is something we urgently need to get done or really tackle from a production standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's honestly something I love about the way that Kinexys is set up. I mean, my team is there to experiment, but to also, figure out what's real and how to get that in production. So I think there is value to experimentation in and of itself, and for me, the reason to do that is to learn, and the only way you learn is by doing. And so for us, that's where I view the experiment bucket, because it is crucial to having that background you needed to get the stakeholder buy-in to know the direction you're heading in has weight behind it and has proof points behind it. What I think is really interesting when we look at what is the definition of success today versus 5 years ago, the bar's gone way up, right? Doing a proof of concept to do a proof of concept does not carry the same clout or the same kind of go forward buy-in that it once did. I don't actually think that's a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. I think it means that the industry has matured. I think the solutions have matured, and the players are at the table. And so there's real value, to be transacted. There's real clients to be onboarded, and I think that's really shifted the focus of what success is. But I do think you need a level of experimentation alongside of it. And they both have unique value.
Awesome. I'm sure there are things that you got to keep quiet, so I won't ask directly, but I could imagine that there's a DeFi component somewhere in there because, let's be honest, because of tokenization and blockchain, yes, you have your traditional assets and you're saving money because they're on-chain. Legacy systems will evolve, but the other unlock is access to DeFi and anything that enables, which we've started seeing some of. But I'm curious to see how that evolves. That being said, and you mentioned multiple times, it's based on client needs and demands. How do you approach your clients, and how do you know which clients are the right ones to ask for feedback? And after you collect that feedback, how do you know how truthful they're being versus kind of trying to be nice or the other thing around, right? So what's your approach?
It's a balance, right? And so it's really important to hear directly from clients. It's really important to be a member of the community and the industry, and also to be front and center from a technology perspective. I think of it as like 3 different pieces to it. So when you think about what makes sense to a client, I mean, obviously we take our clients along with us. And so if we want to test something out, we look at what are the proof points around us, right? Like, who does this affect? Who may be first affected versus down the road? And that's how we kind of think about where to, take our first steps. But when you're looking kind of across the board, right, and you look at DeFi, and you look at all these other really unique constructs that are specific to blockchain tech, there's a lot that can be gleaned from traditional financial services too. Like, there are, markets, I'll tell you, long, been around forever. And so I don't see the constructs that different, but I see the enablers as very similar. Like, to get into, say, DeFi or institutional DeFi, you're going to have the same questions around privacy, interop, and identity. Like, they're kind of at that foundational level. So from our standpoint, if you're true to, like, what are the common enablers and the common client sets across, that's where I think you're able to actually move the needle.
Fantastic. Awesome. So we only have a little bit left, but I do have to ask, you are Kinexys Labs. You're the head of Kinexys Labs, which means you get to have fun with a lot of the forward-thinking things. So on that note, if we're sitting at TokenizeThis 2030, where do you think we're going to be? And whether it's issuances, AUM, assets on chain, what do you think is going to be maybe some of the highlights in the next years?
Yes, I mean, it's one of my favorite questions. That's what I think about all the time. And I think it's actually one of the coolest parts about this industry is that, I mean, I would be lying if I was like, I know exactly where we're going to be, right? Like, here's what the tech is going to look like. And that's the most fun part. It changes all the time. I think what we are going to have in 5 to 10 years is going to be very different to what we see today. But I think that's just the maturity of the tech. I think we are going to see, if you look at today versus 2020 when we first launched our platform, like, we are transacting over 2 billion a day. We've, reached more than 1.7 trillion, like, in total volume on our Kinexys Digital Assets network. Like, I see these continuing to grow. I continue to see the future to grow, whether that's a multi-chain future or, a different subset of what exists today. I think we're going to see, that keep scaling and keep growing. What we're also seeing that I think is going to be a focus in the future in a great way is a little bit of abstraction away from the tech, right? Like, a lot of projects today and use cases and when things are getting off the ground are very blockchain forward. But I think if you look at a lot of the tech around us today, the tech's in the background because people just want a product that works and they want it to work well. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming years, and the blockchain, feature in and of itself will kind of go back a little bit, but I think that's a good thing. Like, even now when we're talking about different use cases, it's not leading with, oh, well, do you want to do a blockchain project? You know what I mean? Or like, do you want to tokenize something? But it's really like, what do people need and what do they want? And then how do you deliver it? Oh, by the way, it's on blockchain. And I think that is going to be a continuation as we go forward.
Oh, so eventually it won't be like tokenized Apple, just be Apple.
I look at my iPhone today versus like, delving too much into my age here, like didn't have that in college. Like, look at my like Razr Motorola phone and what it could do versus what my phone can do now. Like, it's incredible.
That's phenomenal. Thank you, Alex. Big round of applause for Alex, please. Thank you.